Shalom. So we're going to look at the conclusion of the treaty. All right. So this says, the Spanish call these free slaves maroons. Free slaves. What is your definition of free? What is your definition of slaves? Because if you're free, you're not a slave. And if you're a slave, you're not free. So there is no such thing as free slaves. Either you're free or you're a slave. Right? Now, let's just get into Matthew chapter 17 and verses 25 and 26. It says, He saith, Yes. And when he was come into the house, Jesus prevented him, saying, What thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of the strangers? Peter saith unto him, Of strangers. And Jesus saith unto him, Then are the children free. So as long as you're paying taxes or anything like that, you are not free. So you might be driving cars, the same type of cars that your enemies drive. You might be living in the same apartments as they do. You might have the same types of job as they do. But guess what? What you're seeing here is that these people get more crafty, because back then you could point out this person is a slave, that person is a slave, and this person is free, this person is not free. Now these kings, they enslave their own people. So you are now, comparing yourselves to their very own that they enslaved, and think that you are on equal footing. No, you want to compare yourselves with people? Compare yourselves to the Jewish people, the ones that live free. They're at the top floor of all these big buildings. They don't pay taxes. They don't go around doing this. They don't live like you do. They don't go to a 9-to-5 job like you do. That is what free people are. Not with the other peasants, the poor white people, or whichever nation the poor set. No. The ones that don't pay tax, those are the ones that are free. This is why now you have a federal government. Back then you had a king. Now you have a federal government. So you see, the more time these people get, is the more they go on to, it's like they can make the word of the Most High void. Because when you read this and you say, oh, of the children of the strangers, but their own people are paying taxes today. Right? So we have to understand that. So it doesn't matter how luxurious you're living, it does not take away the fact that you are still a slave. And this is one of the things why a lot of people do not understand the balance with judgment and grace. So yes, you're still doing all that hard work, but guess what? The grace is like the reward you get, the salary at the end of the month, or bi-weekly or weekly or whatever it is, right? There's a veil in there, in that grace. And this is why a lot of people who do not believe in the New Testament or the Messiah fall short. They are still under that veiling, because they get lost between judgment and grace. They're still stuck behind that veiling. Now imagine you're doing the same job you're doing now, the same job you claim you love, the same job you were excited to get out of bed to go to. What if they should remove the grace, remove your salary, would you still be motivated to go there? Honestly. So you don't work because you love your job. You work because you're a slave. The only thing they did was updated their language. So no longer they call you slaves. They call you employees. And they don't refer to themselves as slave masters. They refer to themselves as employers. So you see how they change things to alter how you perceive things? Because if they were still using those terms, slave and slave masters, on the job, guess what? You would be forced to remember what truth is. I was working with this company some years ago, and they got a new clocking machine, right? The timer. And the machine came with two titles, slaves and masters. The workers got so mad they tore down the one that says slaves. But it's the truth. So no one wants to deal with the reality that yes, we are still slaves. No one wants to accept that. So again, it goes back to Adam and Eve hiding in the garden among the trees. You want to be equal with these other people. You don't want to be called an Israelite because we know all the Israelites today are slaves. So you want to call yourself all these other different names, hiding among the trees in the garden. Your spirit cannot hide from the Most High. Oprah Winfrey couldn't hide. Right? So there's no such thing as a free slave. Doesn't matter how much money you get for your salary. You could get the whole entire bank for your salary. You're still a slave. Right? It says, in 1655, the British conquered much of Jamaica, forcing the Spanish to flee to the northern coast rather than become slaves to the new masters. Vast number of Spanish slaves took this opportunity to join the maroons in the hill country. At first, maroon resistance impeded British efforts to drive the Spaniards from Jamaica, prompted one Spanish commander to conclude that the maroons were loyal to the Spanish crown. The maroons quickly dispelled this governor. Edward D. Oily built an alliance with the maroon leaders, who quickly routed the Spaniards from their remaining settlements by 1660s. Because what? From in the 1500s, 1553, the maroons and the Spanish were okay. They could not conquer the maroons. So this is not just something that came about since the British. It had always been this way, because the Most High had to make a distinction between who his people are and who are not his people. It says, escalating tension with the British, who could not dislodge the Maroons from their mountain fortresses. By 1720, the Maroons took the offensive mountain raids against British plantations along the base of the mountains from 1729 to 1739. A state of open warfare existed between the British and the Maroons. Because what? These people used to go and raid and plunder. They used to attack their economy. And that's the last thing the white man wants you to do. You can attack anything. His wife, his children, but not his economy. If you want to see their rage, destroy their economy. Right? So this is why these people were classed as a fierce or unruly people. They don't war with rules. They don't have to come and kill off your people. They destroy your stocks, your grains, force you. It's a form of laying siege to a city. You destroy their supplies, right? When you look at Portland, the terrain there, is very good for war, and these people were, you can take like 25 maroons to destroy 300 British, right? Because back in those days, when you had to put the powder in the gun, right, before you can shoot again, at that time, a lot of British, soldiers would die. When you poof, by the time you have to go reload again, you're already under attack. So it didn't take much maroons to go and destroy a whole army of British, right? It's not like today where you had these war tankers and these advanced weapons. If they should declare war on this state of the maroons today, they would lose. But at that time, they could not. The British could not defeat them. You had the higher ground, you had the mountain passes, right? Today they have drones, so they would have the higher end, right? You cannot go to war with someone who is higher than you. That would be a foolish attempt, right? And they could not starve the maroons because they would come down and burn everything, take what they want, and go back. The first British governor, Robert Hunter, was frustrated by Jamaica's mountainous terrain, which the Maroon leaders used to their advantage, right? Because if you look at those bridges in Portland and so forth, they're very different. The physical features of that land, very different, right? It says, the Windward Maroons were led by the Captain Quao, while the Leeward Maroons followed Cudjoe. A skilled and ruthless guerrilla warrior, Hunter died in 1734, and within 5 years the British decided that the conflict would have to be resolved through negotiation. Exactly, because you couldn't make war with them, right? Now, so you'd have the Windward Maroons led by Quao and Nani, and the Leeward would be by Quaco, right? It says, the Leeward and Windward treaties of the 1739 ended the Maroon-British Wars. British slavery in the Caribbean, however, lasted for another century, and the Maroons were obliged to return runaway slaves to the British. This is going in the conclusion of the treaty, because this here is telling us something. 100 years after this came to an end, guess what? Slavery was still going on. Then, if these people had their freedom, why the rest of the indigenous people were not free? Think about this. 1739, 1740. Treaties, right? So you have the people in Portland and those regions, and then you have St. James, Trelawney, a compound. 1740. Now, which island in the Caribbean first recognized as independent? 1801. Haiti got their independence. Why, when the Maroons got their independence or freedom in 1740, this was not recognized? That's something to think about. So that's the first thing to let you know, that these people were free before everyone else, but they were not recognized. They are not Israelites, right? They could not free the other people. Even though the British could not conquer them, they could not free the other people, right? It says, thus making them reluctant, willing participants in the very system they had fought so long to escape. So guess what? they are now becoming the same thing that they were fighting against. They were fighting against the British, but now they became British. They were fighting against this whole slavery thing, but then they became slave masters. It says, the massive slave uprising of 1831 led to the final abolition of slavery in Jamaica and brought the British Caribbean, throughout the British Caribbean. Now, it says abolition of slavery. That is for another subject, because the slave trade was abolished, but slavery continued, right? So that's something different. Now it says, this puts the treaty in a clear context. The Maroons were free well before the British entered the island. From the Spanish were there. The Spanish people were there. The Maroons were free. Why would they consent to give up their freedom to a slaveholding state? Why? They are free people. Now, this is the Second Maroon War of 1795 and 1796. It was an eight-month conflict between the Maroons of Cudgelstown, Trelawney, a Maroon settlement later renamed after Governor Edward Trelawney, at the end of the First Maroon War, located near Trelawney Parish, Jamaica, in the St. James Parish. Because you had the Maroon town up in the country area of St. James, right, in Montego Bay, in the country area, and then you had a compound which is very close, because St. Elizabeth and St. James, they border up in the mountains, right? So it says, and the British colonials who controlled the island, the windward communities of Jamaican Maroons, these are the ones in Portland, remained neutral during this rebellion, and their treaty with the British still remains in force. A compound town, however, this is in St. Elizabeth, sided with the colonial militias and fought against Trelawney Town. They fought against their own people, and this is why the Spanish could have said that these people are always loyal to the Spanish crown. The Africans always sold us out to the Europeans, and this is why they are going through hell over there with the Europeans there. French, Spanish, all of the European peoples, Netherlands, everyone. Africa is in a turmoil right now. So you see, these Maroons even made war around with their own people just to prove their loyalty to the enemy. And this is a common strategy for dividing and conquering, right? For example, what these people will do is, say you are the leader of your tribe, they will ask you to kill somebody very important just to prove your loyalty to them. That's divide and conquer. They do this with us today. Very subtle. A lot of us are doing it and don't even realize that that is what we're doing. That's all part of dividing and conquering. Each time you sell out your own people, you prove your loyalty to the Romans. This is not merely coincidental. Rather, this is part of consistent pattern that colonial powers use with non-European peoples. See? They all do it. And that the US later adopted in dealing with the Native Americans. The British most likely drafted this treaty, explained it to the Maroons, ex-slaves who could probably not read, as a grant of their hard-fought freedom, then tried to take it back through deceptive clauses and dishonest explanations, because everything that was said in that treaty was in favor of the British. So all that freedom, they didn't, the Maroons, they're not really free. But they're just keeping them just in case. For example, like I said earlier, if a war should break out, right, the Maroons would have to fight as mercenary for the British. No. Here we have a prime minister, we have a governor, governor general. The prime minister controls the police. The governor general controls JDF, right? The soldiers. What if this person should wake up to the fact that he's an Israelite and he wants to change? Yeah, he controls police and citizens. These people control the JDF. If this man should wake up to his true identity and want to wake up the rest of the people, guess what? He would have to face the military of the government. This does not belong to him. No, these people would ally with the Maroons and in numbers to their cause. So the Maroon would have to team up with the Governor General, which is going back to the English, to fight against these people over here. So there are so many ways in which they divided us to conquer us. So even though this man has the say over the police and over all the citizens, he does not have the say over the military. So if they should declare war on a certain state, they would have to ask the Governor General permission to use the military. They cannot just go and do that. And this is why they don't want to take the military to go and conquer the Maroons or their lands. Because if this should ever be possible, because the prophecy said that he would pour out his flesh, his spirit on all flesh in the last days. So whoever is sitting in this seat, if that should happen and this war should come, they're going to need the Maroons to fight as mercenary. Right? It says, the British most likely drafted this treaty, explained it to the Maroons, ex-slaves who could probably not read, as a grant of their hard-fought freedom, then tried to take it back through deceptive clauses and dishonest explanations. This is best served by an analogy to contracts of adhesion in the United States. One does not agree to the terms in a form of contract that are unreasonable. Would a reasonable slave people, having won their freedom with their blood, then agree that the enslavers would nominate their leaders? That's going into democracy. And that is exactly what they have in the Maroon regions. Democracy. Would a reasonable slave people, not being able to read and understand the agreement, agree to become a vassal state of the nation which they just repelled with their own bodies? No. So it goes back to what it said. So this is the conclusion of the treaty. This was all about the British in the first place, and still is. The Maroons have been played. They are just subjects. to the British, right? It says, the Windward Maroons, led by Quao and Nani, ending hostilities in returning for freedom, land granted of 500 acres called Moortown or Nannytown. So guess what? You fought for your freedom, but yet it's like a deal to get land, right? It says, Nani saw the principles of negotiated peace and Nani saw the principles of negotiated peace as a form of subjugation. As it said, there would be a vassal state to the British, right? Treaties were signed in 1739 by Leeward and Windward Maroons in 1740. So this is why Nani saw it that way, because she knew that these people were not really free. They were still under the British. They still had to go fight for the British. They still had to go and defend the very thing they were just fighting against. That is against your will. That is being forced intelligently. Right? It says, slavery lasted another century after a treaty requires them to support the institution of slavery. So, you just signed a freedom from slavery thing, right? Now, 100 years after that, slavery was still going on, and not only going on, but guess what? You were supporting that cause. What does that tell you? It goes back to what I said about Haiti. Haiti's independence was 1801. Maroon was in the 1700s, yet Haiti was the first to get their independence. Right? As close as Portland is to St. Thomas, you don't find any Maroon areas in St. Thomas. They're not the same people. A lot of people left from St. Thomas to go to Portland, but you still have separate people there. The Maroons are not Israelite. They are the one that kill or deliver up the Israelite leaders. It has always been so. And the British put them up as puppet heroes for Jamaica. They're not heroes for Jamaica. We know who we are, and we know who our heroes are. The Ashanti are Israelites, not the Maroons. Shalom.